Okay, we are now recording. Thank you, Dr. Christine Patrick. Okay, so this will be a recorded session, and for our panelists in general, I think what is probably the most obvious question on everyone's mind, like what is happening in the presidential election right now? Anyone?
I'm happy to take a stab at that. What I saw happen was a genuine blue wave in the cities and a genuine red wave in the towns and the countryside. I think both sides believed that if they could really motivate and get their vote out, that they were going to have a mandate to govern. And what we found out is that both sides got out the vote, and we're kind of back at 50-50. So the election in that sense didn't really settle the bigger questions. But with two actual waves, I think that's what complicated the predictions.
That was actually one of the questions I had for our pollster, but he hasn't joined us yet. So hopefully he'll hop on. Because of course we do know that like a lot of the recent polls predicted that this would be a landslide victory for Joe Biden, and of course it's turning out that whoever wins is going to be a tight race.
Mr. Alford, I think it might be helpful if you were able to move closer to your microphone because we're not able to catch anything that you're saying.
Well, my microphone is flipped onto my collar,
Your mask.
but I'll try taking off my mask. Is that better? Can you hear me?
It's better.
You're 10 feet away from it.
Well, let me see if I can fix this up just a little bit.
If you could just stay there by the computer, it was really picking your voice up better when you're near the computer.
Right here?
Yes.
Okay, let me grab my list of questions here. I appreciate your patience as we work to accommodate these new changes. Okay, so I suppose maybe another a good question to ask is what is happening here in the state of Oklahoma and with your respective elections? Mr. Bloombaugh, I'll pitch this one directly to you. What's currently happening at the BICE headquarters?
You mean throughout this election cycle, or what are people doing today right now?
How are you celebrating the aftermath of your unexpectedly large victory?
To be honest, it really hasn't set in yet. I think that, we've had quite a large campaign. I've been fortunate to have an army of interns and I think a massive ground game. So I know we have about 6 volunteers today and some interns here at the office that are picking up signs and doing administrative stuff. I had a paid GOTV effort at the end. So we're trying to make sure they have all their W-4s and admin paperwork done. And I think a lot of stuff is just looking at inventorying the office, seeing what storage units we need to do. I think we're trying to do a big volunteer appreciation night this coming week. And so we're gearing up for that, just something that we can do to say thank you to all of them. I don't know if you guys saw, we released some of our metrics from our campaign. And, I think we had in over 1.5 million direct voter contacts that does not include mail in this campaign. And, a lot of that was about 500,000 phone calls to voters. Those aren't robos, those are direct calls. We knocked, our team alone, over 150,000 doors knocked. And I think that's, that might seem like an easier thing said than done. That's from January to now. But that's having to have a relentless ground game and play like you're behind the entire time. Yesterday was kind of a rest day, but a lot of interviews, a lot of meetings.
Okay, all right, thank you. And Mr. Sellers, I'll pitch the same question to you as well. How are things going at the Inhofe headquarters today?
Senator Inhofe's been senator now for 25 years, so they're just continuing steady state. They know how to run. They know how to run the office now.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Okay. So then perhaps what we can do at this point is extend the discussion to the, or actually, I'm sorry, I'm leaving somebody out. Mr. Owens, how are things at the headquarters for Representative Mullen?
Well, we're somewhere in the middle of Mr. Sellers and Matt's team. We've kind of been here. This is going on 10 years for us. So Mark Wayne spent yesterday, he went to the governor's office, and here at the campaign, we are just moving forward, getting things wrapped up. As soon as I get through with this, I'll be out with a friend of mine going around Cherokee and Muskogee and probably McIntosh County in a truck to pick up a bunch of signs. We have a pretty large district, so we're going to be mobilizing our efforts to start cleaning up, getting the signs out of everybody's yards and getting them off the fence rows, so that way we can move forward with this and hopefully start to govern again after the presidential race, gets figured out.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Okay, so how do y'all think that the presidential race has affected politics in Oklahoma this cycle? And this is a general question for any of our panelists.
Hugely. I think that, the president doing well in Oklahoma was crucial to a lot of, to our congressional races, our down ticket races. I think that you really saw the Trump bump whenever he takes all 77 counties again, even, the urban areas like Tulsa and Oklahoma City. I think that it showed to be strong because a lot of people had support for the president. They wanted to turn out to vote. Whenever you have a candidate who energizes a base, I think it's easier for people to turn out to the polls. And I think that we saw that here in Oklahoma with the numbers, even speaking for Mark Wayne, the congressman won 75% in this district. And that's the first time he's ever gotten that high. And I think that's attributed a lot to what he's been able to do as a congressman, but also with the effect that the president has here in Oklahoma.
Awesome. And, that actually is a pretty decent segue. Mr. Boomba, I'm going to pitch this towards you then, because Josh has suggested that the presidential campaign, the presence of Trump on the ballot, is overall a major factor contributing to the advantages of Republicans. How did it affect your particular race? Because I know that Donald Trump's approval rating in that district is maybe not what it is in other parts of the state.
Yeah, I'll say it's certainly been its best, the last a little less than the last 2.5 weeks. It's certainly been at its highest. I think, some of us saw different polls earlier in the year where, BLM had higher probability than the president in OK5. I think that, that being said, I think that, it's kind of a balance. I think with us, luckily we had an incredible candidate, Stephanie Bice, who had a lot of experience already, had done a lot of incredible things in her track record in the state Senate. And I think with that, I think it's good that, I think for generic ballot performance, I think it's good when you see, I think balancing generic ballot performance of, how many Republicans are going to vote straight party. And, I think anyone who's voting for the president certainly wasn't going to vote for Congresswoman Horn to reelect her. That being said, as we know that our opposition had a head start on us, and even during the primary and the runoff, from our own internal numbers collected from voter contact, about 8.7% of Republicans were supporting Congresswoman Horn. And so for us, a big part of that is a lot of Republicans we knew in the Edmond and Northwest Oklahoma City area were not the biggest fans of the president. That being said, I think that we had a very strong candidate, and nominee now, our Congresswoman-elect, who I think had her own policy points to run on. But I certainly think it did help with generic ballot performance. And, if the president would have, I think in the end, I think we overperformed his numbers in district, which means that we did our jobs and that we worked. So I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, no, I think that does answer the question. Seems like y'all had a bit of a tightrope that you had to walk on throughout the whole election. Would you say that's fair?
I would just say that a lot of it, I think it's personality. I think a lot of people, a lot of folks who might not like the things the president says on Twitter, they might like policies and the things that, the actions that he does in the White House. I think that for us, the big thing is, and I heard some people say some different things, but I think some people, tried to bank on that. I think some people tried to run on nothing but the support of their support of the president. And I think, we have a very highly intelligent voter base here in the 5th district of people, in the Edmond area. You have more people have a bachelor's degree than don't, and about a third of the population has a master's degree. And so with those folks, you have to have a lot of very clear substantive policy points in your message. And I think we definitely did that. And I think that honed in our theme on this campaign, which was results, not rhetoric.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Jacob Morgan, I'll go ahead and pitch this to you then. You're fairly local. How do you think that the presidential election has featured in some of the races that you were working on or are working on here in southeastern Oklahoma?
Yeah, I would say the president being on the ballot definitely helped, just because he won the state overwhelmingly last time, and particularly in rural Oklahoma, he has a lot of support, and it's just really helped all the candidates win and reaffirm their position locally.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Moore, I'll then pitch this to you. I'm going to shift it just slightly. It's a similar question, but I think distinct. How do you think that this presidential election has affected voter turnout in our state and across the nation? Because I know that's a big focus of your organization. Let's fix this.
Yeah, I think, well, I'll echo what Brad said earlier, that, we saw a record turnout this year in Oklahoma and across the country, which is outstanding, right? Like, it always frustrates me when you see the turnout and it's like 47%, 49%, 60%. And I have long said that in an ideal world, right, 100% turnout, but then we really get to see where the popular vote is, where the support is. And when you have high turnout on both sides of a race, then I feel like you get a better understanding of what the population wants. When it comes down to just, a few votes or a few thousand votes, I think when the stakes are higher, people get more upset or more, emotionally invested in it. But in my mind, high turnout is good for everybody, and that's the way that a healthy democracy should be working.
Good. Okay. So I think that most of the audience here could probably agree with that, but maybe another question that we could ask, which is closely related, what does the outcome, or perhaps I should say the lack of an outcome in our country's presidential election, say about the capacity of our election boards to handle high voter turnout? Are we prepared? What's going wrong?
I don't know if that was for me, but I'll chime in. Our election board here in Oklahoma is outstanding. We have such a great, well-oiled machine for how we handle elections. That varies across the country, right? We have 51 different ways to do an election, and that is, I think, difficult. And often what we see when we have high turnout or high, civic involvement, is that people who have not been paying attention, who may not have the working knowledge of how the system works, are suddenly inundated with all of this, and they often are, confronted with a situation that they were not prepared for. And so you see a lot of folks being very upset about ballots being counted or not counted. And the fact is, we never know who the president is on election day. Truthfully, we don't know until after the electoral college votes next month. And so some of the outrage, in my mind, people need to read about how the system actually works and understand that this is the way it always happens. I saw this morning the Vermont Secretary of State tweeted that, like, hey, we're still counting votes in Vermont. I know you don't hear about that on the news, but just like every election, we're still in the process of counting it. And that story is across the country. It's not just 4 or 5 states that are working on this. This is a collective effort by, professionals across the country. And I think, first we need to trust them to do their job like they do in every other election. And also the onus, I think, is on us, all of us on this call and in the room, and just us as a citizenry, that we should be more involved and engaged in the process so that we understand how it works, and if there's ways that we can make it better.
Awesome. Okay.
I completely with Andy. I think I'd like to echo what he'd said as well, that having complete faith in our election board here in Oklahoma. I think that Secretary Xerox for the state election board and Secretary Sanderson for the Oklahoma County election board did an incredible job. And I think, us having a crazy ice storm, and I think demonstrating that we had power and emergency bins in these locations, I think they were great. I also would say that I'm so excited to see the absentee turnout numbers that we did across the state and the nation. The one thing that was regrettable, I think, is that a lot of people were trying to question the absentee system. And I think that it's so good. I mean, I think for elderly folks to early vote, I think that Oklahoma, I think we have the perfect system, and a system that could be a model for the entire country when it comes to making sure the security of the election process here. And I just think they did an incredible job. I think they got a lot of grief from people, but they did very well, I think, in everything in this cycle.
So for our panelists in general, then, what are your thoughts on the accusations of voter fraud taking place around our country? Do you feel that there's any merit to those? Do you feel that it's media hype? What do you think is exactly happening?
Well, if I can kind of continue from the previous comments about how good the electoral system is overall, Oklahoma is exceptionally good in how it conducts elections. But if you look around the country, consistently problems come in the biggest cities, and I think it's obvious why. I mean, they have more people there. The precincts are packed together. They have lots of votes to count. There may be more corruption in inner city neighborhoods. So a lot of times what you see in close races is the Republican candidates jump out to a lead. And then as the slow counting in the big urban districts goes on, that lead gets smaller and smaller and smaller. And they find maybe they don't quite have enough to take the lead, and then they start getting down to, I found 50 ballots in my trunk and that kind of thing. I think it's genuine, mostly genuinely a fact that urban votes are going to be counted slower, and it's a shame that that's where Democrats tend to do better. So I think that's where a lot of the idea grows from, where you see Republicans' leads just slowly evaporating and then sometimes disappearing.
Well, and I'll kind of go off of that. I think you see it in states like Pennsylvania and Michigan. It was the same way. Here in Oklahoma, we're used to the process where we already know our mail-in ballots and our early votes going into the election night. We have a number to base that off of, where in those states it was a complete opposite. They start going through a lot of, your early votes, but you don't know all the mail-in votes yet. So you're looking at election day results, and that gets you to that large lead. And then as they start to count those mail-in ballots, that's where the lead really starts to usually shrink for the Republican candidates, because the Democratic candidates do tend to do so well with the mail-in ballot process. So I think, especially in Pennsylvania, that was one of the big reasons that what's happening is happening, was because the process is backwards. And I think especially people here in Oklahoma aren't used to that kind of process. I wasn't used to it because I was wondering what was happening. I had to do my own research to come to that conclusion.
Well, I completely agree with Josh on that. I'd also like to say that I think the reason Democrats do so much better in that process because they've done a better job, at least in Oklahoma, I think, at ushering people through the process. Voters on that. I think for us, absentee and early was a huge part of our campaign from day one. Without us having a very strong absentee push and chase in the runoff, we wouldn't have made it through. It's one of the three factors, I think, that got us through the runoff. But I'd say here is that, we started with a pretty big deficit. We had about a 22% deficit on in the 5th district on Republican absentee requests, Democrat requests, that they had outperformed us by that much. And then we much higher one on the chase. And then we were able to narrow that down about 2% per week until we had less 12.2% deficit last on requests. However, on returns, we actually overperformed Democrats, especially in Oklahoma County. We had about an 83.1% return rate on our absentee ballots, whereas Democrats had about a 79.7% return. So we as Republicans, at least our campaign was trying to do a very robust chase and educate voters on the process of, completing and submitting absentee ballots, returning those.
Thank you. Okay, so honestly, it seems to me like we have some pretty genuine faith in the integrity of the electoral process as a whole. But I do wonder, what do you think the long-term consequences of this election will be for people's faith in the ballot counting process?
I think with a race this tight, you're going to see one side or the other really deflect from or resent the outcome, no matter which way it goes. I think that you just see that with this much of a tight race, you're going to see it. People are going to doubt the process. People aren't going to want to, it might even turn people off from participating, but that's the complete opposite effect of what we want, and I appreciate everyone in the room, you political science students, obviously you might just be taking this to take it, but it shows that you at least are interested in this kind of thing. You want to learn a little bit more and educate yourself. And that's really the goal here, is to educate as many people as possible on the process and why the process works as well as it does here in the state of Oklahoma, and how we can go about getting processes that work across the country. It starts in classrooms just like this, on panels just like this. If you have an idea, if you do your research, don't be afraid to take it to an elected official, to someone at the state election board, because those ideas are where great ideas come from. So thank you for being active in the process and wanting to educate yourself, because I think that is the biggest thing that we can do as Americans, is continue to educate ourselves on the process, and that gives us more faith in the process.
I think the closeness of these national elections is the best argument against dismantling the Electoral College, because honestly, we don't want to go in and recount every precinct in the country every 4 years because somebody lost by 50,000 votes and they're trying to make it up.
Amen.
Okay. Well, I think that's a contentious argument. What do the rest of our panelists agree? I think we can see where Mr. Sellers and Bluebach feel. Jacob or Josh, do y'all have anything to add to that argument for the Electoral College?
We don't have enough time for me to go into my argument on the Electoral College. I'd be very happy to do that at some other time.
Okay, fair enough. Okay.
Can't you just summarize it, Josh?
No, I will be respectful of all the panelists' time here and give everyone an opportunity to answer some questions.
Okay, fair enough. Okay. Well, then perhaps my next immediate question might be primarily for the audience here. So we've got a lot of college students at different stages in their academic career. Some of these are political science majors. Some of them are general education, freshmen and sophomore. But if they were interested in getting involved in any of your campaigns or any of the future political endeavors in our state, what would your advice to them be? So to make that more clear, just as a general question to the panel, what advice would you give to a college student interested in getting involved?
I would say any campaign that you're looking to get involved in, I would say just show up, ask them what they need, and help. I think that a lot of people have ideas in their head of what working in a political campaign's like, and they watch The West Wing or some show on TV and think that's it, and it's not. I think that it's real campaigns is about rolling up your sleeves and getting your hands dirty and working. And I think a lot of people just don't have the wherewithal to stay around and do it. I think that a lot of it's an endurance game. So many of us, I think that we start in politics, whether we volunteered or we were door knocking or volunteering, making phone calls. And next thing you know, you have a full-time staff position on the campaign or are offered something. For my hiring practices, I have a firm that specializes in direct voter contact and is, also have a lot of interns in this campaign. And for me, to be honest, my typical hiring practices are to not hire. political science folks. That being said, this cycle I hired quite a few. I think part of that was work ethic. You know, typically for me, if I'm hiring a canvasser to do door knocking or phone calls or things like that, my big practice was to hire Greeks, people who were in fraternities and sororities in schools, because I feel like they would dress preppy, they'd be competitive, you know, and they'd be very extroverted from having experience with membership recruitment. And that's been a big thing. I think a lot of it's, you know-how and experience from campaigns. But I think, you know, if you stick with it, I mean, our political director, David White, he's incredible. Inhoff's campaign manager, Evan Handy, and Tyler Moore, who ran Oklahoma GOP victory. You know, we all kind of came up together, all went to school together, and we all got to start the same way. You know, we were all poli-sci students, like all of you. And I think we just kind of worked our butts off. And I think, you know, it's a small world, and I think we've outlasted the rest. So I'd say just be prepared to work. And find a specialization. You know, some people stay in campaigns forever. Some of us have gone and been lobbyists. We've come back, we've been staffers, back to campaigns again. I would say recommend finding a specialty. If you want to have a career in politics, you know, whether that's fundraising and events, you know, whether that is comms, the communication side, or that's campaign or lobbying, you know, find into what niche you feel like works best for you, and you know, you can probably keep doing that as a career.
And I'll go off of that a little bit. The advice I would give is don't be intimidated. I grew up in Southeast Oklahoma, just like I'm sure a lot of you did. I grew up in Hayworth, way down in the corner. And I went to NSU in Tahlequah and going to school. I was getting ready to graduate, and I realized that I had no clue what I was about to do whenever I did graduate. And it was intimidating at first, trying to find out how I could even get plugged into any campaign. I didn't know if I was actually going to get involved that much. And I just ended up having a conversation and started interning with the Mullen campaign. And I did it until I graduated. And then as soon as I graduated, I had a full-time job on the congressional office. So I actually work both sides for Mark Wayne now. I run the campaign. I'm still a field rep on the congressional side. So there's a lot of opportunities that come from even just getting your foot inside the door. And I think a lot of that comes from just that initial ask, pushing yourself to make yourself available, making an effort to be seen. And I think that's the biggest thing that you can do, is just make yourself available, make yourself open to flexibility. You know, moving 30 minutes down the road, an hour down the road could help in a long way. And sometimes you don't have to move at all. Sometimes it's local. You never know what door is going to open for you if you just knock on it.
The first piece of advice I would give to this class, as I look at you on the screen, is that students who sit at the front of the class perform significantly better than those that sit at the back. So you might bear that in mind in the future. The other comment I would have, the previous two commenters kind of commented on how you could get involved and maybe become a professional in politics. You know, that doesn't have to be your intention. You can get involved just enough to be a better informed voter and a better informed citizen. I mean, I used to vote, and I would have no idea who the judges were, what they were up to, or let's say city councilmen or county officials, people like that. But once you get involved in even just a local campaign, maybe every couple of years you pick somebody to help, and you go out, you go to a few events, you meet all these people, and you find out what they know and what they're about, and you make much better informed decisions when you're in a voting booth, and just as a citizen living your life and deciding what positions to support and what to oppose.
I have a little bit of a different background than some of my colleagues here. I am new to politics, relatively new, just the last few years. I've started out as a counselor. I'm a licensed counselor. I did marriage counseling for about 10 years. And then I worked in public health and ran an infectious disease clinic, of all things, for the last 10 years. And through my experience there, started paying attention to public policy and started looking for ways to make a difference on a different level. And just built friendships. I mean, I literally just went to the state capitol and met with people I already knew, like Congresswoman-elect Stephanie Bice. We've been friends for years and years through Twitter, and I mean in the real life, and then reached out to people cold call, right? Like Congresswoman Horn. I emailed her out of the blue several years ago and said, "Can I like have lunch and pick your brain for 30 minutes?" And kind of like what Josh said, just put yourself out there and you have a chance of building relationships and making connections, and that has a way of opening doors that you might not expect. But to go back to what Brad said, also it's not just campaign work, right? Like there is civic engagement, there is being involved in politics in ways that might affect you directly right now. For example, of all the things that I care about, one that I have spent a lot of time on the last month or so is my neighborhood. I live in Oklahoma City, and Oklahoma City has a pretty comprehensive bike walk plan that they put out last year. And my neighborhood is excluded. It's right between two big areas that are included, but we got left out. We have an elementary school and a high school that are just blocks away, and a lot of folks, children that need to use the streets to get to school. And so me and some of my neighbors like set up a Zoom call with our city council member and some city planners, and we are going door to door and leaving flyers and collecting information from our neighbors as a way to make our little corner of the world better. And eventually it'll, have to go to city council meetings and be involved in a way that I haven't done yet. But it is really rewarding to make a change that like will benefit my children in a tangible way. And so whether it's, working for a senator or presidential campaign or trying to get sidewalks in your neighborhood, you can be involved in whatever way speaks to you the most.
I think that the last panelist who hasn't weighed in on that, Jacob Morgan, you're yourself a young college student and you're fairly local. What is your advice to students looking to get engaged?
Yeah, my advice is just saying, just piggyback off of Mr. Josh Owen, just put yourself out there, and then only thing a person could say is no. And usually if the campaign or candidate is worth anything, they're not going to turn down free labor at the end of the day. And one of the other suggestions I will make is think about, or depending on what you want to do, you should think about nonpartisan or bipartisan groups, organizations, or initiatives. Like I think the last one I was on was Marcy's Law, and I met a good amount of Democrats that way. And it's a good way to kind of broaden your network, people you might not always agree with, but you could have that connection there at the end of the day. You don't know when you'll need it, but it's always good to have, and that's about it.
Okay, thank you. So my next question is primarily a question I developed after speaking with some of my campaigns and elections students, and I think it's relevant to all of you. To what extent do you think the outcome of an election is the product of strategic decisions by a campaign team as opposed to outside factors that you have no control over, like the economy or COVID?
I think a lot of people used COVID as an excuse to be lazy. I think that if you have an innovative and hardworking campaign team, then you can kind of overcome quite a bit. I think with us, I think a lot of people were concerned about door knocking with COVID. So with us, we had a lot of pre-printed post-it notes that said, we're not knocking doors to keep you safe, just leaving you some information. Call or text us if there's anything we can do to help. And we had volunteers put all those pre-printed post-its that looked like they were handwritten on thousands of sheets, and we went through about 30,000 doors twice doing that before we went back to door knocking again. I think we had a lot of phone calls. I think that the cost of TV ads isn't going to change, and prices and things don't change, and so we had to find unique ways to fundraise and do. I think peer-to-peer texting was also something that was paramount to our success. Same with fundraising. We used peer-to-peer text to fundraise. I think people seem to find new and unique ways to continue to campaign. I mean, if you look at someone who maybe campaigned in the Reagan campaign or back in the 80s, the methods and things that they did wouldn't be as successful now. I think door knocking is still important, but so many things are always changing. I think we just kind of have to roll and adapt with those things as they come.
I think Matt's exactly right, especially with COVID how it is. I mean, campaigns had to get creative across the board. You had to find different ways to get your messages out in front of the audience that you're targeting, because that's at the end of the day, that's what it is. You're trying to find your universe. You're trying to find your audience. And for me, it's the second district. I'm not focused on Texas or Oklahoma City. I'm focused on where I'm at. So I'm trying to find different ways to get my message to my audience, whether that is from peer-to-peer texting or digitally. Social media is a huge part of everyone's day-to-day lives. I'm sure many of you have checked your Twitter at least 3 times since the Zoom call started. So it's paramount that we are making ourselves out there on social media, making ourselves seen, and getting our message across the way that you can convey it with those face-to-face conversations. Because at the end of the day, these Zoom calls don't give us that same personal connection, but it's a lot better than just talking to you over the phone. So I think Zoom has been another tremendous thing that's come to this. Everyone's starting to use it a lot more. I know that Mark Wayne loves Zoom calls now. If he can't see someone in person, he would much rather see their face on a computer screen and be able to talk with them. And I think that still gives the human element of campaigning whenever you're able to talk face to face with donors, supporters, even people in the opposition that you can actually talk to and have a conversation with. I think that if you're making yourself get out there and you're being creative in the ways that you can talk to people through COVID, I think that's the best way to run a campaign. Be innovative.
Well, if you're talking about issues like you mentioned the economy, right? The purpose of a campaign is to maximize and emphasize the things that are to your advantage, and to minimize and de-emphasize the things that are against you. So if you're running for re-election and the economy's bad, you have to explain why maybe that wasn't your fault, why you tried to take steps to improve the situation, but maybe didn't get passed, and what you're going to, most importantly, what you're going to do in the future to make those problems better.
Okay. I'm going to ask one final question, and then I think I'll turn it over to the audience and allow the audience to submit some questions. And I'll run through this final question one speaker at a time, just to keep it orderly. So my final question, what are, for you, the biggest surprises of the 2020 election cycle? And Brad, you're on the screen, so I'll go ahead and start with you, big brother.
Oh my gosh, the biggest surprise that those Trump rallies could turn out thousands and thousands of people day after day, five rallies a day in all the battleground states. And that's not enough to win states like Pennsylvania.
Okay. Mr. Owens, you're up. What's the biggest surprise of 2020 for you?
So are you talking about the entire election cycle, or what are we?
You could do Oklahoma, you could do the nation, and you can talk about the cycle or the outcomes, whichever you prefer.
So I think one of the biggest surprises to me is that the polls are still as wrong as they are. We saw the Trafalgar group get closest again when everyone was calling them Looney Tunes and wackos for getting as close as they are, and they were the ones that got it close again. I think that a lot of people expected the polls to be a lot closer this go around for the presidential races. They had Biden winning in landslides in some of these states that were razor thin. And to me, I think that's the shocking part. I think that after so long, you would tend to get it right, and it's just surprising to me that it didn't happen this go around. So that's probably my biggest surprise.
Okay, good. And I'm already getting indications from the audience that there's a good deal of curiosity about the polls getting it wrong and the interplay between the polls and campaigns. But before we get there, Mr. Bloombaugh, biggest surprises 2020.
To be honest, that Republicans didn't lose more seats in the Senate. I think that a lot of folks anticipated for us to lose more seats. I think folks like Joni Ernst keeping it there. I think there were some concerns with Lindsey Graham's opponent, being able to pull in $57 million in Q3 alone. And I think that a lot of that shows that it's important to have a robust ground game to outwork your opposition. And I think that money doesn't buy everything. I think that I think one of the biggest fears for me was this cycle is losing control of the U.S. Senate, and it's probably one of the most important things for the Republican Party to do to keep. And so I just think it's a good surprise. I think that a lot of these seats weren't lost.
Okay, Mr. Moore.
Yeah, I think all the good answers have been taken. I mean, in some ways, 2020 continues to surprise me by the fact that things keep surprising us, right? Politics and just in normal life. And so the fact that so many people are surprised at the outcome of this is in some ways a little surprising. I don't know. Matt stole my answer, to be honest.
Okay, it happens. Jacob, you're the last.
Yeah, what I'm really surprised about is how really close it is, particularly to Joe Biden winning it and his whole campaign really not emphasizing door knocking to their campaign and to their state party affiliates in like Georgia, Florida, and all that good stuff. So it's just really interesting to me how he used technology and like these smaller campaign events and just media, other ways to communicate to voters and turn out other than door knocking. And it looks like he's going to win. So it's going to be interesting to see how that is going to affect door knocking in the future and just the campaigns in general.
Okay, thank you. All right, so at this point, I will turn it over to the audience. Students, I know some of you are coming towards the end of your lecture hour. If you've got another place to be, you are welcome to quietly excuse yourself. However, I would also encourage you to hang around if you can, because you're welcome to ask some questions. Given the scenario with the microphone, what I will suggest is that you can either approach and you can ask your question directly, or if you would prefer, raise your hand. I will call on you and I will give you an opportunity to ask the question and then repeat it so that our panelists and audiences abroad can hear. If you are joining us remotely and are not physically present in the room, then I would ask that you indicate in the chat if you have a question, and I will call on you so that you can unmute your microphone. And I already see we've got one question from Dr. Rick Farmer for Andy Moore. Dr. Farmer, you want to go ahead and ask your question?
Well, I know that Andy has worked a lot on the issue of the process for redistricting. And so I thought it'd be interesting to hear his thoughts about the process of redistricting, and then others may have comments they want to make about that.
Sure. So, next year is redistricting across the country, where every state legislative district and congressional district will be redrawn to reflect shifts in population. And it's going to be closely watched, I think, by certainly by political folks, but I think the general public is starting to tune in. We've seen measures to create independent redistricting commissions in a number of states since the last time we did redistricting in 2010. And so seeing what the impact or the outcome of those are and how the process goes. Here in Oklahoma, the state legislature will be doing it again. And what they've proposed would be the most open and transparent process that we've ever had in state government. Which is honestly pretty exciting, right? Like, I'm partial to independent commissions. That's why we were running our effort, and COVID got the best of us this year. And so, I'm looking forward to working with the legislature, helping host, town hall meetings, public meetings around the state, to get input from the public in the process. And I do think, as we were talking earlier, something that I think Brad said is interesting. As we're working on counting ballots, right? And as he said, in urban areas, there's more ballots, there's more people, and it's taking longer to count. And, part of the reason that we saw such big lines at the polls this week was, for one, because we had fewer ballot booths in many polling places for social distancing, but also as people have shifted and moved where they live, then we have more folks living in some of these urban areas, and the precincts are bloated, right? So there's more people living there having a vote in those precincts, and that makes it more crowded. So just the process of redistricting and getting to redistribute our populations in a way that is more balanced might, I hope, right, like make some of these election issues like maybe less concerning, because we kind of rebalance the system in some appropriate ways.
Okay, great. Did any of our other panelists want to weigh in on that? Okay, Dr. Petty, I believe you had a question.
Yes, I thought it was a different question, though. I wanted to ask about the polls, but those kind of answers already. But I heard from a lot of my students that they weren't interested in election or this. I heard from a lot of my students that they weren't interested in the election because they were just exhausted from all the back and forth with the president and his tweets and his remarks and maybe the media's reaction to those remarks, but they just were alienated by, the vitriol. And so that's not who the local politicians are. They're people like everybody else, but they're associating the election and politics in general with Mr. Trump and his personality and his behavior. And I'm wondering what your opinion is on how that would have affected younger people's turnout and maybe getting them involved in politics in the first place.
Okay, so for those of you joining from home who didn't quite hear that, and Dr. Petty, correct me if I'm wrong, I think that the question is, how did the vitriol on behalf of President Trump and other figures in politics affect voter turnout and mobilization, especially among young voters? Yeah, so she's giving me the thumbs up. So yeah, that's the question.
I think not at all, because young people do not vote by and large.
Okay, I heard some other people speaking up at the same time.
Yeah, sorry, Jacob. I actually think that it energized a lot of people. The turnout might not have been there, but I think I think young people actually wanted to take part in the process. I think that on either side, if you're frustrated with the president, if you're frustrated with the media, if you're frustrated with whatever you're frustrated with, I think that people are actually starting to, like I said earlier, I think they're educating themselves on how to use that frustration. And a lot of people, I think, just get frustrated with the process. And so I think that educating ourselves is the key here. But I think that with that frustration, I think it has actually started to let people use that frustration in a way that is effective in democracy, which is going out and voting, going out and social media for young people that I follow, still college students today, they are very active on social media and getting their opinions out for different candidates on either side of the aisle. So I think that there's a lot of frustration with the process as a whole and what we've seen from our country. But I think that it's going to end up energizing young people in ways that, maybe we haven't seen before.
Okay, who else? All right, okay, I thought there was somebody else who had wanted to weigh in there. I'll remind people in the audience, if you have a question and you want our panelists to be able to hear you, you'll need to approach and you'll need to speak here. I see a hand back here. Caleb, you want to come up? Or I'm sorry, not Caleb, Slade. You want to come up?
Okay, Matt's on the FISA campaign, right? What is it?
Yes, Matt Bloombot is on FISA campaign manager.
So I got a question more for you, I guess. So when we were looking at the polls in our class, it looked like Vice did not necessarily have the lead. So someone that's internal in that campaign, what do you think the polls are getting wrong about some of these elections, particularly Vice campaign?
Mr. Bloombot?
Well, first of all, I'd say if you're looking at Okie polls, always get it wrong. And so I'd like to find any poll they actually got right. And I'm interested to see what charity that they're going to give money to in that bet with Pat. I would say that, I don't know what snake oil or witch doctor they're using over there on their polls, but I would say that, it was very close. I think, our race was seen as the biggest take back opportunity for the Republicans in the House. And I think it was. I think later it was kind of deemed a toss up because things were very neck and neck. I think that we had. But I think, at the end, you see that there's a poll that has us within, I think, 4.2%. Another one had us 2%, a month out. Another one had us 4.5%. The last NRCC poll I saw had us 5.2 up. And so I saw a consistent trend of us kind of moving upward, the last 3 weeks out. I think a lot of folks saw it as a toss-up a month or two out. And I think it totally was. I think that, we had two, the Horn campaign, they did a great job. They had a, really good job in getting their messaging out. I think they had a really good campaign out and a good team. And, and a lot of mutual respect, I think, from our team and theirs for each other. And I think, and that's, I'd say, so yeah, I think it was a toss-up. I don't think anybody got anything wrong with our race. I think in the end that it came down to, and folks use the term street fight, it basically, who has the most voter contact, who can outwork the other person. And I think that's where we had the biggest advantage. When we've, contacted more voters than anyone else and been doing it relentlessly since January, it's very hard for someone, I think their campaign was doing door knocking and persuasion about a week and a half out, Friday before last, I think, and we were on the get out the vote phase. And I think that's clearly what it came down to in the end. You have all the messaging, all the mails come out. They had a very robust mail plan. So did we, and I think it's just in the end who is able to, I don't know. But I don't think the pollsters really got anything wrong here in our race, except for Okie polls. So.
Jennifer?
Okay, I have a question for you too, Matt. So, well, kind of on my observation, I felt like what really helped out Stephanie Weiss's her campaign is the presidential election. I felt like that was a real big motivation for people to get out there and vote. I guess my question is, like, going forward in the next couple of years, like, what I guess approaches or strategies will you guys use to get the voters to still be motivated to come out and vote for her?
Well, I would say, thank you for the question. I would say that, we did outperform the president. I think that it was a huge motivation for people to vote, I think, in standing those long lines. But then again, our campaign wasn't ran on, we didn't, have this messaging or strategy of trying to necessarily closely tie ourselves to the president in order to get us to victory. That was certainly not our strategy. I think we talked about issues. I think they're important to voters from all parties. I think the one thing that was really important here in the 5th is how do those indies, those independent voters and swing voters feel? I think, issues like education, healthcare, criminal justice reform, and job creation are things that were huge in our campaign. And those are luckily things where our candidate has had the most tremendous impact in, voted for teacher pay raises, helped with tons of sentence commutations, and reforming our criminal justice system here in the state that still needs a lot of work done on it. And I think someone who's also, helped modernize our beer and wine laws and create over 5,000 new jobs. And I think no matter where someone stands on the partisan spectrum, I think they care about job creation, healthcare, education, things that help their family. I think so long as we have very substantive talks about things in future elections that every single person can relate to or see as a tangible thing that affects their life, rather than hyper partisan talking points, I think that's it. I think across the country, the people who maybe fell on their face or didn't perform as well as they'd like to, probably tried capitalizing on some of these issues, these polarizing issues. And I don't think moving forward that's going to be as effective as it has been for some people.
I think we have time for one more question. So do you have any other questions? All right, Nathan Crawford. And Mr. Bloombaugh, I will also note that Jennifer Gomez, who asked that question, was one of the volunteers who phone banked for Stephanie Weiss.
Oh, well, thank you so much. I love that. Thank you very much.
So this is more of a question for everybody. A lot of times voters will simply vote on their party preference without looking into the actual candidates. Do you think that is a problem in our elections, or do you think that helps voters pick candidates?
So just to reiterate for all of our panelists, Mr. Crawford would like to know whether you think people relying on party ID to choose who they vote for is a problem, or it's useful to help people pick who they're going to vote for?
I think it is so useful for them because at the end of the day, the voter, they already know or have an idea of who they're going to vote for, even if they don't know who the candidate really is. If you have that party affiliation there, then it's really easy for them just to summarize, like, okay, this person is going to believe this way, so I'm going to vote that way. And it's easier for the voter too if they vote straight party ticket, and it saves them time and they can get out and go do whatever they want instead of voting. So I think it is a benefit, and I think that it might possibly be a problem to some people because there's not enough communication on either why this candidate, even though they're with this party that you support, isn't the best for you.
Okay. Anyone else want to comment on this? All right. Well, in that case, I want to thank everyone again for their willingness to take part in this presentation. I want to thank our audience for being here as well. If I can get the camera to pan. Hello. So I would like to thank our audience here in the classroom, as well as those of you who have joined us abroad. OPSA does have other panels going on. We have on our Facebook and our website program that you can use to identify the Zoom links and figure out what topics and speakers are going to be talking at what times today. Thank you again, and have a nice day, everybody.
Thanks for having us.
Everybody.
Thank you so much, everybody. Appreciate it.